One machine, one single invention, and within a single human lifetime, it rearranged who held power on this entire planet. Before this machine existed, power was tied to land. Whoever owned the most fertile fields, the most rivers, the most water-driven mills, controlled the wealth. That had been true for literally thousands of years. Then one broken pump sitting in a flooded coal mine in England accidentally rewired the entire system, and almost nobody at the time understood what had just happened. Here's the part nobody tells you. The steam engine wasn't built to make anyone's life better. It was built to solve one extremely specific, extremely profitable problem. Coal mines kept flooding with water, and the deeper miners dug, the more water seeped in, and removing that water by hand or by horse was slow and expensive. So in 1712, an ironmonger named Thomas Newcomen built a steam-powered pump specifically to drain mines faster so mine owners could extract more coal faster for less cost. That's it. That was the original purpose. Not progress, not humanity. Drainage for profit. Newcomen's pump worked, but it was incredibly wasteful. It burned through enormous amounts of coal just to heat and reheat the same metal cylinder over and over, which honestly didn't matter much to the mine owners since they had unlimited coal sitting right there anyway. For decades, that's all the steam engine did. Pump water out of mines, nothing more. Then, in 1765, a Scottish instrument maker named James Watt noticed something. He wasn't trying to change the world. He was repairing a broken Newcomen engine for the University of Glasgow, and he noticed it was wasting roughly 3/4 of its fuel, reheating a cylinder that should have stayed hot the entire time. So he separated the condenser from the main cylinder, patented the idea in 1769, and quietly fixed the single biggest flaw in the most important machine nobody outside of mining had ever heard of. This single fix is the hinge point of the next 200 years of human history, and almost nobody alive at the time had any idea. Here's why that one mechanical fix mattered so much. Once steam engines stopped wasting most of their fuel, they stopped being something only coal mines, sitting on unlimited free fuel, could afford to run. Suddenly they were efficient enough and cheap enough to be worth installing literally anywhere. And Watt didn't stop there. By 1781, he'd figured out how to convert the engine's up and down pumping motion into smooth, continuous rotary motion, a spinning wheel. That detail might sound boring. It is the single most important detail in this entire story. Up until this exact moment, every factory on Earth that needed serious mechanical power had to be built next to a river, because water wheels were the only reliable way to spin heavy machinery. That meant industrial power was geographically locked. You could not simply decide to build a massive factory wherever you wanted. You needed flowing water, and flowing water existed in specific places, controlled by whoever already owned that land. The rotary steam engine broke that lock completely. Suddenly, a factory owner could install a steam engine literally anywhere there was coal nearby, which, conveniently, was usually wherever desperate, displaced rural workers happened to be flooding into, looking for any job at all. Geography stopped dictating who got to hold industrial power. Capital did. This is the part that should genuinely disturb you. The steam engine didn't just speed up manufacturing. It detached economic power from land ownership for the first time in human history and reattached it to whoever already had enough capital to buy machines and build factories. Land had been the ultimate asset for thousands of years, specifically because it was scarce and tied to geography. The steam engine quietly made a new kind of asset more valuable than land itself, and the people who already had spare capital lying around were, unsurprisingly, the same wealthy families who'd already benefited from enclosing common land a few decades earlier. By 1800, James Watt and his business partner Matthew Boulton had sold roughly 500 steam engines across Britain. 52 went into mines, the original use case. 84 went into cotton mills, an industry that exploded specifically because of this technology. The rest spread into breweries, ironworks, flour mills, anywhere that needed continuous mechanical power and wasn't lucky enough to sit next to a strong river. Cotton mills are the case study that matters most here because they show exactly how fast this technology concentrated wealth into fewer and fewer hands. Before steam power, cotton spinning was largely done by individual families, working at home on small spinning wheels, selling thread to merchants. It was decentralized. Difficult, low-paid work, but at least spread across thousands of independent households who controlled their own labor. Steam-powered cotton mills destroyed that arrangement within a single generation. A factory owner who could afford a steam engine could now run hundreds of mechanical spindles simultaneously, all day, every day, producing thread faster and cheaper than any individual family ever could by hand. Home spinning didn't just decline, it was economically annihilated almost overnight by anyone measuring in historical terms. So the families who used to control their own small piece of the cotton industry lost that independence entirely. They had exactly one option left: go work inside the factory that had just destroyed their old livelihood, for wages set entirely by the factory owner, with zero leverage to negotiate, because there was no longer any alternative way to make a living from cotton at all. This is the same mechanism that pushed millions off enclosed farmland, just applied to an entirely different industry. Remove the decentralized alternative, force everyone into a centralized system controlled by whoever owns the machines. Call the result progress. The steam engine also did something else that rarely gets mentioned, which is that it made transportation itself a tool of concentrated economic power. Once steam engines could be mounted on wheels, you got the railway, and once they could be mounted on hulls, you got the steamship. Both transformed trade, absolutely. But they were extraordinarily expensive to build, which meant railways and shipping lines, almost without exception, ended up controlled by a small number of already wealthy investors and companies, not by ordinary workers or small farmers. By the mid-1800s, a handful of railway companies in Britain controlled the movement of nearly all goods and most passengers across the entire country. If you were a small farmer or a small manufacturer trying to get your product to market, you didn't get to choose freely among competing transport options. You paid whatever price the regional railway monopoly decided to charge, because building a competing railway line required capital that essentially nobody outside the existing wealthy class could access. That pattern, one transformative piece of infrastructure, controlled by a tiny number of capital holders who then charge everyone else for access to something that should arguably function as a shared public resource, is not unique to railways. It's the exact same structure that later played out with electricity grids, oil pipelines, telephone networks, and eventually the internet itself. The steam engine is where that specific pattern of infrastructure monopoly first crystallized at scale. Here's the part that connects all the way to today. The steam engine didn't just power factories, it generated an entirely new category of fortune, industrial capital, that didn't exist in this form before. And once that category of wealth existed, it didn't distribute itself evenly across the people whose labor actually generated it. It concentrated, predictably, in the hands of whoever already owned the machines, the factories, and the railways, while the workers running those machines for 12 and 14 hours a day saw almost none of the wealth their labor was creating flow back to them. By the time Watt's patent expired in 1800, the economic transformation was already irreversible. Steam power had permanently shifted the foundation of wealth away from land and toward industrial capital, and the family's position to own that capital, when the shift happened, locked in an advantage that, in many cases, their descendants are still benefiting from today. So when you ask how the steam engine changed everything, the honest answer isn't really about pistons, condensers, or rotary motion, even though all of that mattered mechanically. The honest answer is that one efficiency fix to a mining pump quietly handed a small group of people the ability to generate and control wealth on a scale that land ownership alone had never allowed, and the rest of society spent the next 2 centuries living inside the system that small group built around that advantage. The machine itself was neutral. Metal, steam, pressure, motion. It had no agenda, but the people who controlled access to it absolutely did, and the structure they built around that control, concentrated capital, centralized factories, monopolized infrastructure, is the same basic structure still running large parts of the global economy today, just wearing modern names instead of steam-era ones. So here's the question worth sitting with. If the next transformative piece of technology follows this exact same pattern, controlled early by whoever already has capital, then used to quietly concentrate wealth and power away from ordinary workers, would you even recognize it happening in real time, or would it just look like progress, the same way it did in 1776?